tighter supplies, there'll be good demand for imported product. The import product from ourselves in the UK, but then also from the Southern Hemisphere. And we have seen some growth and increase in the volumes coming in from New Zealand into the European market. And that has undercut ours because it is so much cheaper. The New Zealand lamb price, or the last price that I have for last week, was 350 cent a kilo, or just over 352, whereas ours was 916. So there's a significant difference there in terms of the price.
Hello, I'm Kieran Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring you latest insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. Seamus McMenamin, Sheep Sector Manager with Bord Bia, joins us on this week's episode as we look at the lamb trade. We discuss what's been happening with international trade, falling new numbers in UK and Europe, and the impact that these changes could have on the lamb trade this summer. We finish up the episode discussing trends in demand and attracting younger consumers. We start off with Seamus discussing the factory throughput this year to date.
At the start of the year, the indications were that there was more hoggets about, and I suppose initial forecast showed that there was about 40,000 extra lambs in the system, but those have never really materialised. There's sort of a few reasons for that. Maybe there was less of a lamb crop last year than we thought, and then there's also there's a bit more live export activity going on, and then there's also been a redirection of some lambs from Northern Ireland that usually would have came here, or actually end up being shipped to GB. I suppose they qualify for the red tractor over there, so it was more sort of the price was more attractive for them to ship them to GB rather than send them down to the south for processing.
Look, Seamus, that's probably the carry through of difficult spring last year. You said numbers probably weren't there. It did have an impact on drafting, but it probably had an impact on the numbers as well.
Yeah, and we have seen in the last couple of years, that shift towards later lambing. Where lads are tending to try and lamb that wee bit later to suit sort of grass growth. But we were caught out a few years ago, having, the ewes lambing, no grass, having to go in with big feeds of concentrate, so boys have definitely shifted to that wee bit later. And I suppose with more part-time farmers and things like that, it sort of suits their system. So I suppose then that's then reflected in the number of spring lambs that we've seen coming forward. Now, there has been an increase maybe in the last week or 10 days or so, but they were running about a third behind where they were last year. And then in terms of the number of cull ewes, there's good numbers of cull ewes going through as well at the minute. Just, I suppose there's an attractive market for them at the minute.
It's becoming a little bit of a pinch point at the moment. I suppose we have to be cognizant, like Edel Ada is coming up. That's going to see a bit of a bump in the trade.
Yeah, there is, and I suppose if you go across the UK, they're very similar to ourselves. They predicted a 10% reduction in their throughput for the first half of the year. Now they've since revised that up to a 7% reduction, but that's because they've actually killed an awful lot of ewe lambs that usually would have been kept for breeding, so that's kind of increased their trade. But I suppose we've seen plenty of reports in the press in the last few weeks of a very strong live export activity, and some of those sheep would be destined for the UK for direct slaughter, and others then on into continental Europe for processing.
Look, we have seen a bit more competition in America, and I suppose you touched on two things. One, the extra ewe lamb kill across the world. We may have seen a little bit of that given the price we've seen here over the last couple of weeks for hoggets. That combined with the live trade, Seamus, it's pushed things on a bit.
Yes, it's definitely held price where it was. I suppose in the run up to these festivals, demand tends to be fairly strong anyway. And then, maybe as the numbers start to appear, then later on the trade comes back, follows that normal seasonal trend of coming back slightly. It always follows the same pattern. Now this year we've started on a very high price point, so it's just how far that's going to come back now when the numbers start coming out.
So we're looking at festivals 2 weeks off now. I suppose to an extent, Seamus, it might coincide with first early draft, maybe a singles coming off as well. Again, I suppose, look, carcass weight wise, we're still pushing 18 kilos up.
Yeah, no, I suppose the range for the biggest brand of the customers is that 18 to 22 kilos. And I think the spring lambs that are coming out are of very good quality, and meeting that spec. It's just there would probably be scope for them to handle more of them. And even in terms of, the entire kill for the first 4 or 5 months of the year, the quality's generally been quite good. They've generally been meeting spec. Now there has been some heavier lambs being presented, but I suppose there are market outlets for those too, just at a lower sort of price.
I suppose, look, the question most producers will have in mind is what's in store for the rest of the summer. So we might break that down a little bit in terms of where the trade is going. If we look maybe at UK, we look at Europe, we're seeing a slight reduction in new numbers. Bad spring again in the UK, so that's going to have an impact. What do you think is the knock-on impact of both of those things on trade for the summer?
Yeah, but I suppose the UK are our biggest competitor in the EU market. They export to the same customers as us, and service the same markets. I suppose they've actually forecast a 1% decline in their yo flock. But I suppose if I look at their yo slaughterings and things at the minute, I would suspect we'll see a bigger reduction there than what they're expecting. So that will maybe keep their production levels a wee bit lower. But I suppose we have to remember too, I suppose the UK have signed new trade deals with the New Zealand and Australia, so we're seeing a bit more product coming in there. Now, not big volumes, but there's definitely been growth in the volume of product they're importing, and the more they import, the more they have to export to compete against us. I suppose then you're going into the European market, and there has been a decline in the sheep flock in Europe. They're talking somewhere between a 5 and 7% decline for the second half of the year in terms of supplies of lambs for processing. Number of issues probably not dissimilar to here. Asian farming population, issues with profitability, flooding and drought in certain parts of Europe have all impacted, maybe the interest in the sector. So that's all going to impact, on supplies. Beneficial for us in one perspective because obviously there's tighter supplies. There'll be good demand for imported product. So they import product from ourselves in the UK, but then also from the Southern Hemisphere. And we have seen some growth and increased in the volumes coming in from Australia or from New Zealand into the European market, and that has undercut ours because it is so much cheaper. The New Zealand lamb price, or the last price that I have for last week, was 350 cent a kilo, or just over 352, whereas ours was 916. So there's a significant difference there in terms of the price. So whenever someone's coming in with a cheaper, maybe frozen product, it's very it's very attractive for maybe some of the food service and smaller retailers in Europe.
Just like we mentioned, look, we know there's been certain transport issues with the Suez Canal over the last couple of months that did have a knock-on impact on their trade as well. But just in terms of, look, they're at a far lower price point than us. But the cost of shipping to here relative to maybe other markets like China that opening up for them.
Yeah, no, it is.
That could potentially have a bit of an effect on that balance too.
Oh, it could, and I suppose like what we've seen anyway, China has started to import a bit more sheep meat anyway, which is great for us because it's obviously the favoured market for New Zealand and Australia. But while they're taking more product, it tends to be at the cheaper end of the scale. It tends to be for your cheaper cuts and your flanks and that sort of thing. I suppose in the last few days we have seen some more of the Australian plants being, regain access to the Chinese market, so that's very encouraging. But China takes 45% of all the sheep meat traded around the world off the market. So any shift in that market affects everybody because it affects the flow of product from everywhere. So I suppose if I look at it from a New Zealand perspective, they've actually had a very strong lamb kill up until now, up by about 5 or 6%. But if you look at the New Zealand forecast, they're talking, that it would be just marginally up by maybe 0.5%. So it does indicate there's going to be very tight supplies of sheep meat in New Zealand in the next few months, which obviously will maybe impact their export capabilities. And then if you go to Australia, then we've seen very, very strong growth in their sheep flock in the last 3 years. But I think the flock has now peaked. And given those issues with profitability at farm level in particular, that there will be a decline in their flock. And I suppose then in Australia as well, there's obviously been a lot of publicity around their live export trade. And there was the unfortunate incident where the boat left, couldn't get through the Suez Canal and had to come back. And I suppose that created a growing focus on the Australian live export trade. So that's actually now that'll actually be banned now from May 2028. There'll be no more live sheep exported from Australia for direct slaughter. So that in itself, a few years down the line, will have a further impact on how sheep meat is going to be traded globally.
So we also have to be cognizant, like small changes internationally can have a big impact on our potential export markets. So they can
Yeah, I suppose if you look at Australia exports live sheep into, the Middle East, North Africa. So if they're not getting live sheep, it interrupts the balance of where either they'll have to look elsewhere, either for product or for live sheep, and that then impacts the trade balance then for everyone. And then I suppose I should have mentioned as well, there's also real profitability issues in New Zealand as well. From farmers interest in the sector, and then to add to that, there's a significant competition for land as well. That is that is maybe forced some sheep producers or to consider getting out of the sector. So I think overall, longer term, we're looking at reductions in production from both New Zealand and Australia, combined with some growth in demand in China and also the US. So hopefully we'll see. We'll not see the flood of cheap product into the EU market.
Look, it's setting up that it could be a good enough summer ahead. I suppose, look, cognizant we've talked here about the supply end of it. I know you've been busy over the last couple of months at different trade fairs, with different buyers coming in and out. Just from a demand point of view, are we seeing any shifts in demand, or how has it looked over the last couple of months?
Yeah, I suppose we obviously do insight reports and things across sort of the key export markets, and there has been growth in both the recognition of Irish lamb and also the demand and consideration of lamb by consumers. Part of that is due to obviously we've got growing Muslim populations across Europe that do eat an awful lot of lamb, and also a lot of the promotional bodies similar to ourselves are increasingly targeting sort of a younger consumer, and moving towards putting on shelf more sort of value added products and ready to cook. To sort of, it's a shift away from your traditional lamb legs and racks and that sort of thing. Towards to suit sort of the younger and maybe more modern consumer. So there has been some positivity in the demand side of things, but I suppose what we're hearing from customers is, suppose, that huge differential between us and the southern hemisphere is always the first thing that comes up. So I suppose we just need to sort of all of our ducks in a row on our sustainability messaging, just to sort of show them that even though we're very highly priced, we're sort of worth it.
Highlight the quality we're putting into it. Look, you touched on just a couple of things. We might just finish up on this one. The younger consumer, bringing them in. I know we're heading into the summer. You'll have no doubt of promotional activities coming ahead for that. Jim's challenging getting them into it, and maybe what your plans are for the summer for getting more young consumers eating lamb.
Yeah, well, I suppose just over this bank holiday weekend, we have Bord Bia Bloom and a key focus of some of, we've got Nevin Maguire and a range of other chefs up on stage there, and they're using a variety of lamb recipes that are specifically targeted younger consumers. And in terms of our promotional activity, we're shifting towards using more influencers and online sort of activity just to target into that younger audience, and showing the convenience and versatility of Irish lamb. And then I suppose every year we have two specific bursts of lamb specific activity on the home market. We consume about 15% of our lamb domestically. So that'll be kicking off in June, and another burst in September then, just to tie in with the peak supplies coming on in June, or spring lamb starting to come forward. And then as we move into September, just maybe looking more at your autumn and your winter sort of recipes and inspiration and that sort of thing at that stage of the year.
James, look, good getting that update from you today. Appreciate you coming on.
No worries, I'll talk to you shortly.
We'll leave it there for this week's episode. Certainly some optimism in the lamb market for the summer. It was good getting Seamus on for that update. We'll have him back later on in the year. That's it for me for this episode. For updates from our sheep programme, keep an eye, as always, on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Kieran Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to follow us wherever you get your podcasts.